This channel's for people who don't scare easy. If that's you, hit subscribe, turn the lights down, and get comfortable. What you're about to hear might follow you to sleep. The headlights appeared out of nowhere, trailing close behind on a stretch of empty highway. For over an hour, the driver and his friend, a man with military training who rarely showed fear, watched as the SUV matched their every move. The friend's unease grew with each mile, and when he quietly reached for the tire iron tucked beneath his seat, the atmosphere in the car shifted from casual to tense. When they finally pulled over and shone a spotlight into the pursuing vehicle, they caught a glimpse of a gaunt, expressionless face before it vanished into the night. Their confrontation left them with a single haunting question. Who else is out there on these lonely roads watching from the darkness? Sometimes it's only when the road grows quiet that you realize how exposed you really are. On the winding roads of Pennsylvania's I-80, the sense of isolation can settle in quickly. It was just past midnight when the narrator and his friend, a quiet veteran, drove west through the mountains. His veteran training made him data-driven about threats. When he tensed, the narrator knew something was wrong. The two had been traveling for hours, the car slicing through long stretches of empty road, the night pressing in on all sides. They hadn't seen another car in ages when a pair of headlights appeared behind them, distant at first, then slowly creeping closer. The narrator tried to ignore it, chalking it up to another late-night traveler. But as the SUV drew near and stayed close, never overtaking or falling back, unease began to build. The friend's eyes flicked to the mirrors, his posture shifting. "They've been there a while," he noted, voice low. The SUV's behavior became impossible to dismiss. Every time the narrator changed speed, the vehicle behind matched it. When he moved to a different lane, the SUV followed. He tried to reason it away, but the tension in the car only grew heavier. The friend, usually calm, now leaned forward, his attention sharp. "Don't change pace anymore," he said, his tone flat and certain. That was when the narrator's worry turned solid. If someone with his friend's background was concerned, there was real cause. Minutes crawled by. The SUV inched closer, its headlights filling the rearview mirror, the beam almost blinding. The narrator's mind raced through explanations, but none fit. The feeling of being watched grew sharper, a sense of being boxed in with no good options. He focused on the road, every muscle tight, the hum of the tires and the glow of the dashboard the only constants. Then the friend spoke again, quiet but firm. "Pull over," he said. The narrator hesitated, instinct telling him to keep going, but the friend's seriousness left no room for argument. He eased the car onto the shoulder, the crunch of gravel under the tires unnaturally loud in the stillness. The SUV followed, stopping a few car lengths behind. For a moment, nothing happened. Both vehicles idled, headlights burning through the dark. The narrator's friend opened the glove compartment, but instead of a flashlight, he reached to the rear of the truck for a handheld spotlight. He handed the narrator a tire iron and said, "Lock the doors after me. Don't get out." His voice was steady, but the edge of caution was unmistakable. The friend stepped out, the spotlight's beam cutting through the night as he approached the SUV. The narrator sat frozen, watching the beam waver and settle on the other car. For several seconds there was no movement. Then the light caught the driver, a pale, gaunt man, his face expressionless, eyes hollow and fixed on the glare. The moment stretched, the only sounds the low rumble of engines and the faint wind in the trees. Suddenly, the man inside the SUV shifted. He yanked the gear shift, reversed, and sped away, his headlights vanishing down the highway. The friend stood still for a moment, watching the taillights disappear. When he returned, he slid back into the passenger seat, his jaw tight. "Don't stop again tonight," he said. They drove off with questions they'd never answer. How long had he been watching them, and what if they hadn't stopped? The rest of the drive was silent, the threat gone but the unease lingering. Sometimes the line between coincidence and danger is thin, and you only know which side you're on after the fact. As the miles slipped by and the Pennsylvania mountains faded in the rear view, the narrator realized that trust in your instincts and the people beside you can be the only thing standing between a close call and something far worse. On empty highways, a single wrong turn or moment of hesitation can change everything. And as the night wore on, the road ahead promised new challenges, waiting just beyond the next curve. What if the next car you pass on a deserted highway isn't just another traveler? Out here, in the dead of night, real dangers aren't always what you expect. Sometimes they're waiting in the shadows, watching. Every story you're about to hear comes straight from the people who lived it. Drivers, delivery workers, and night shift wanderers who found themselves face to face with the unthinkable. One of these ambushes vanished without a trace. No spikes, no truck, just a nightmare you can't prove. These aren't campfire tales. They're true accounts, backed by police logs, news stories, and first-hand confessions. Welcome to the Pale One, where every nightmare is rooted in reality. If you're new here, subscribe to the Pale One and hit the bell so you never miss a chilling true account. Some roads are quiet for a reason, and sometimes what you see is only half the story. It was supposed to be another ordinary run. That was the first thought Mike had as he pulled his 18-wheeler onto I-40, his thermos steaming with coffee strong enough to keep him awake for hours. As a long-haul trucker, he'd seen plenty of oddities: deer darting across the asphalt, cars abandoned in the middle of nowhere, people walking along the highway miles from anything. But this stretch of Interstate 40, about an hour outside Albuquerque, always carried a particular weight. The road was empty, flanked by snow-dusted plains and broken only by the occasional reflective sign. There were no headlights in his mirrors, no streetlights, just darkness, thick and absolute. Mike had driven this route countless times, letting the engine's steady hum settle his nerves. The air inside the cab was dry and cold. Tonight, though, the tension felt different. The snow swirling against his windshield seemed to muffle every sound except the low rumble of his tires. It was sometime past midnight when he noticed two amber hazard lights up ahead, flickering from the shoulder like dying fireflies. They belonged to a pickup truck, barely visible against the gray, shifting snow. He slowed down, hands steady on the wheel, watching as the outlines of the truck grew sharper. At first, it looked like a typical breakdown, a vehicle stranded in the wrong place at the wrong time. But something about it felt off. The truck's angles didn't line up right, and it was slumped awkwardly, as if something had been shoved under the rear tires. Mike's eyes narrowed. He scanned the road just beyond the pickup and caught a glint of metal, a faint, unnatural shine reflecting his headlights. There, scattered across both lanes, were long, sharp spikes. They weren't debris or the aftermath of an accident. They'd been placed with intent, forming a crude barrier. Mike's pulse jumped. He eased up on the accelerator, the truck's hazard lights flickering in his peripheral vision. The pickup wasn't just abandoned. It was part of something staged. The spikes were laid out in an unnatural pattern, and the hazards flashed on and off, cutting through the falling snow. He felt it then. A pit in his stomach, the unmistakable sense that this was no accident. Instinct took over. Mike yanked the wheel just enough to swerve into the empty oncoming lane, heart hammering as the rig cleared the spikes by inches. As the trailer shifted, he heard the metallic clatter of a spike scraping beneath his tires, a sound that made his skin crawl. The sudden maneuver sent a shudder through the cab, but it was the only move he had. In the rearview mirror, two figures emerged from the darkness of the ditch beside the pickup. They moved fast, running toward his trailer with a single-minded focus. Mike had only seconds to register them, dark coats whipping in the wind, faces hidden by hoods or masks, a flash of metal in one of their hands. Whoever they were, they looked human, but their movements were too deliberate, too practiced. For a split second, Mike felt them closing in, their presence pressing against the edges of his vision. And then they vanished, swallowed by the storm and the distance he'd managed to put between them. The pickup, the spikes, the figures, all of it receded into the snowy dark, becoming little more than shapes lost to the night. Mike kept driving, pushing his rig harder than usual, convinced for a while that they might follow, though no headlights ever appeared behind him. When he finally reached the next truck stop, his hand shook as he lit a cigarette in the lot. The smoke barely calmed him. He called the police, trying to explain what he'd seen without sounding unhinged. He gave them the mile marker, described the pickup, the spikes, the masked figures. Then he waited inside the harsh fluorescent light of the diner, hoping for answers, or at least some confirmation that he hadn't imagined any of it. But the call he got back offered nothing. The dispatcher's voice was calm, almost bored. "We sent a unit out," she said. "The truck is gone. No sign of spikes either. Not even footprints in the snow. It was as if the entire scene had been wiped away. They suggested he'd been driving too long, that the isolation and fatigue could play tricks on his mind. But Mike knew what he'd seen. The glint of metal, the calculated placement of the truck, the way those figures moved. None of it felt like a dream. That empty report marked the start of sleepless nights on I-40, where every dark silhouette could be waiting. The road he'd traveled for years now felt changed, haunted by what-ifs and the memory of the spikes clattering under his wheels. For weeks, Mike found himself scanning the edges of the highway, tense every time he saw a stranded vehicle or a flicker of hazard lights in the distance. The images replayed over and over, the shapes in the ditch, the flicker of those hazards, the metallic glint on the asphalt. He still drove Interstate 40, but never at night. Even years later, he sometimes caught himself glancing back at his mirrors too often, searching for something he hoped he'd never see again. He never learned who set the trap or why. Sometimes at a rest stop, he'd hear other truckers swap stories. One night, he overheard a pair talking about an ambush on a different highway, the setup nearly identical. Spikes in the road, a fake breakdown, masked men waiting in the dark. The realization that these weren't isolated incidents only deepened the unease. Mike's story is a reminder that the most dangerous threats on the highway aren't always accidents or bad weather. Sometimes they're deliberate, calculated, and waiting for the right moment to strike. And sometimes the aftermath isn't relief, but the gnawing certainty that something out there is watching, waiting for another chance. Not all dangers on the road come from what's ahead. Sometimes it's what follows you into the night that lingers longest. Kevin's shift had ended just after midnight in Sacramento, and he was looking forward to the quiet drive home, the kind of silence that usually helped him shake off the chaos of the pizza shop. The streets were mostly empty, houses dark except for the blue flicker of a forgotten television here and there. He'd made the same trip dozens of times, cutting through the suburbs on a narrow, two-lane road that twisted between rows of sleeping homes. But that night, something felt different before he even realized why. It started with headlights, sharp, sudden, and far too close in his rearview mirror. Kevin noticed them the moment he turned onto the stretch of road leading out of the city. At first, he figured it was just someone in a hurry, maybe another late-shift worker anxious to get home. He tapped his brakes to send a message, but the car behind him didn't back off. If anything, it crept closer, the glare filling his mirrors and washing the interior of his car in harsh white light. He pressed the gas, trying to put space between them, but the car matched his speed exactly. The sense of being watched, of being measured, settled in his chest. Kevin's hands tightened on the steering wheel, sweat gathering on his palms despite the cold. He glanced at the empty houses lining the road and felt alone in a way that made his skin crawl, imagining what it would look like to have no witnesses if something went wrong. Another turn came up, and Kevin took it quickly, hoping to shake the tail. The car followed without hesitation, headlights unwavering, never dropping back, never trying to pass. He tried again. Another sharp turn, this time onto a street he barely recognized, the road narrowing under a canopy of trees. Still, the car followed. The routine of evasion, the brake taps, the sudden accelerations, the weaving through side streets, blurred together, each move met with the same relentless pursuit. The realization set in. This wasn't impatience or road rage. This was something else. Someone was hunting him. The tension reached a breaking point when the car behind him suddenly surged forward, cutting into his lane and forcing Kevin onto the shoulder. His tires skidded across loose gravel, the car jolting as he fought for control, heart hammering in his chest. It was a calculated move, not a mistake. For a split second, Kevin thought he might lose it, end up in the ditch, but he managed to steer back onto the road, adrenaline flooding his veins. He didn't stop. He didn't even look in the mirror for a few seconds, afraid of what he might see. Instead, he pushed further into the maze of back roads, every turn a desperate attempt to lose the car. The headlights stayed with him, unwavering, always there when he checked. The city felt impossibly far away, the houses spaced too wide apart for anyone to notice what was happening out on the road. Kevin's thoughts spiraled. What did this person want? Was it just a sick game, or something worse? The possibility of a crash, a breakdown, or simply running out of options gnawed at him. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only minutes, Kevin turned onto a residential street lit by a few porch lights. He glanced in the mirror, and for the first time, the headlights were gone. The road behind him was empty. He slowed, not trusting the sudden calm, every muscle in his body still tense. He drove several blocks in silence, heart pounding, waiting for the glare to return. As Kevin pulled into the lot near his apartment complex, relief began to settle in. But as he rounded the last corner, it vanished. Parked along the curb, just feet from his driveway, was the same car. The headlights were off now, the engine silent. Kevin's stomach dropped. Through the windshield, he could make out the figure of the driver, barely visible in the dim light. The man looked straight at him and smiled, a slow, knowing smile like he had won. It was a look that said everything: control, satisfaction, and a promise that Kevin would remember this night. For days afterward, Kevin couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every drive home became an exercise in paranoia, checking mirrors, scanning corners, bracing for headlights that might appear out of nowhere. The fear wasn't just about what had happened, but about what hadn't. He never learned who the driver was, or why he'd been targeted. The motive was a blank space, a question that followed him through every quiet street and empty parking lot. Sometimes the scariest moments on the road aren't the ones that end with a crash or a confrontation. They're the ones that leave you with unanswered questions, the ones that make you second-guess every shadow and every stranger. Kevin's story is a reminder that not every threat announces itself with violence. Sometimes it's the quiet pursuit, the intent behind the wheel, and the knowledge that you're alone when it matters most. And sometimes the only warning you get is a feeling in your gut, a sense that something isn't right, that danger is closer than you think. For some, that warning comes too late. For others, it's the only thing that keeps them moving forward, searching for the next safe place, hoping that the next stranger they meet is the one who means them no harm. Running low on fuel in the middle of Kansas, Alex watched the gas gauge sink lower with every mile. The highway around him was empty, the night pressing in on both sides, and the only light came from his own headlights. He hadn't seen another car in nearly an hour. His phone, which had shown a single bar of service for most of the drive, flickered and then dropped out completely. The sense of isolation was complete. No help, no signal, just the open road and the growing worry that he might not make it to the next town. So when the neon outline of Gas and Go finally appeared ahead, Alex felt a surge of relief. The sign buzzed and flickered, some letters half lit, the whole thing threatening to blink out at any moment. The building behind it was small and battered, the paint on the pumps peeling, the lot empty except for shadows. This wasn't the kind of place you'd choose to stop, but with the needle scraping empty, Alex didn't have a choice. He pulled up to the closest pump, engine ticking as it cooled. For a moment he just sat there, hands still on the wheel, surveying the empty lot and the edges where darkness pooled. The place looked deserted, but the lights inside were on. He grabbed his wallet, stepped out, and the cold hit him hard. The only sound was gravel crunching under his boots as he walked to the door. Inside, the air was stale and faintly chemical. Behind the counter stood a thin man with gray hair and tired eyes. He didn't say hello, didn't nod, just watched Alex with a flat stare. The silence stretched, and Alex felt the urge to fill it. But the attendant spoke first, his voice low and almost monotone. "Get back in your car and leave." Alex stopped, uncertain if he'd heard right. I just need to fill up," he managed, nodding at the pump outside. The attendant's face didn't change. He shook his head, slow and deliberate. "Don't stay. Fill up somewhere else. Just go." Alex's mouth went dry. He tried once more, voice quieter. "Why?" The man only glanced past Alex toward the window. The movement made Alex turn, catching his own reflection in the glass, the empty lot behind him. For a second he thought about pushing for an answer, but something in the man's tone, quiet, final, almost pleading, made him stop. Instinct took over. He turned and walked out, the warning echoing in his mind. Outside, the cold felt sharper. Alex hurried to the car, suddenly aware of how alone he was. He slid into the driver's seat, hands shaking as he fumbled with the keys. The engine sputtered, then caught. He tried to call for help, but his phone screen was dead. No service, nothing. A flicker of movement in the rearview mirror made his breath hitch. From behind the station, two figures emerged, stepping into the weak pool of neon light. Both were tall, shoulders hunched, faces hidden under hoods. Their steps were slow but purposeful, closing the distance with every second. Alex's pulse hammered as he jammed the car into gear. One figure broke into a run, covering the ground in seconds. A hand slammed into the driver's side window, hard enough to rattle the glass. Alex caught a flash of metal in the other hand, something long, reflecting the buzzing light. He stomped the gas pedal, tires spinning on the gravel before catching. The car shot forward, and he twisted the wheel to avoid the second figure, who stood motionless by the pump, watching. He didn't look back. The Gas and Go sign shrank in the mirror, then vanished into darkness. Alex kept driving, pushing the car faster than he should, the road unfolding in his headlights and nothing else. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He didn't know what those people wanted, but the attendant's warning rang in his ears. If he'd stayed a minute longer, he might not have made it out. When he reached the next town, Alex found a payphone and called the local sheriff's department. He told them about the warning, the figures, the attack on his car. The deputy listened, then said in a flat voice, "Every time we check, there's no one there." Alex never went near that stretch of highway again. For weeks, he replayed the night in his mind, the flickering sign, the attendant's tired eyes, the silent figures in the dark. He wondered if the man behind the counter had saved his life, or if he was simply tired of seeing what happened to those who didn't listen. The station remained a question with no answer, a place that lingered in his thoughts every time he saw a flickering light on a lonely road. Sometimes all it takes is a warning to change the course of the night. But even when you listen, the road doesn't always offer safety. There are places where isolation is a shield, and others where it only makes you easier to find. Some nights, the road feels less like a route home and more like a test. For Jonah, an Uber driver working the late shift in Boise, Idaho, it started with a routine airport run. The request came from a business traveler. Gray suit, rolling suitcase, and a faint smell of cigarette smoke clinging to his jacket. The ride itself was uneventful. Just a quiet drive through the city's edge and out to a roadside motel on the far side of town. The man thanked Jonah, disappeared into the shadows of the lot, and left Jonah alone with the hum of his engine and the glow of the app. Jonah checked the dashboard clock. 12:47 a.m. He let the car idle for a minute, plotted his route back toward the city, and took a sip from his thermos. The roads were empty, the night air cold and sharp. He rolled down the window to clear his head and started back toward the main highway, headlights cutting through the darkness. 10 minutes later, he noticed a car behind him. A dark sedan, older but clean, its headlights dimmer than they should have been. At first, Jonah didn't think much of it. Late-night traffic was sparse, but not unheard of. Still, the sedan's behavior set him on edge. It followed at an odd distance, sometimes dropping back, sometimes surging forward until its lights filled Jonah's mirrors. The movements were too deliberate to ignore. Jonah's hands tightened on the wheel. The sedan drifted closer, then dropped back, only to suddenly accelerate and nearly clip his bumper. Jonah's pulse jumped. He tapped his brakes, hoping to send a message, but the sedan only responded by pulling up again, hovering in his blind spot. The road felt narrower, the isolation heavier. He tried to focus on the lines ahead, but his eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror. Then, without warning, the sedan stopped dead in the road. Jonah swerved hard, tires grinding against the gravel shoulder, heart thudding in his chest. He straightened out, floored the gas, and tried to put distance between them. But the sedan's headlights snapped back to life, high beams glaring, and it lunged forward, matching every move. Jonah's attempts to lose it, quick turns onto side roads, sudden accelerations, only seemed to encourage the chase. The sedan cut him off once, forcing him to brake so hard his seatbelt locked. Each move felt like a test, a push to see how far he'd go. The landscape outside the car offered nothing but empty fields and the occasional darkened farmhouse. Jonah's mind raced through options. He considered calling for help, but his phone showed no bars, just a blank screen and the faint blue glow of the dashboard. He tried to remember if he'd seen any other cars, any open businesses, but the night had swallowed everything behind him. Finally, a gas station appeared ahead. The neon lights buzzed against the dark, promising a moment of safety. Jonah took the turn too fast, tires squealing as he pulled into the lot and parked under the harsh glare of the overhead lamps. The sedan didn't follow. It idled at the edge of the lot, headlights pointed away, as if waiting for him to make the next move. Jonah sat for a moment, breathing hard, then forced himself out of the car and into the station. Inside, a lone clerk stood behind the counter, mid-yawn, pausing as Jonah entered. The ordinary calm of the place made Jonah's panic feel out of place. He grabbed a bottle of water, paid in silence, and stood by the window, watching the lot. The clerk said nothing, just watched him with a puzzled glance before returning to his phone. Jonah took a long, silent gulp of water, trying to steady his nerves. He lingered by the cooler, listening to the hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint rustle of plastic bags. When he finally stepped outside, the air felt colder than before. He scanned the lot. No sign of the sedan. Relief washed over him in a slow wave. He climbed back into his car, started the engine, and pulled out, glancing one last time at the empty road behind him. But just as he merged onto the main road, he saw it. The sedan, parked a little farther down, half hidden by the shadow of a streetlight. The driver's window was rolled down. Inside, a figure sat motionless, face obscured by the darkness. One hand lifted in a slow, deliberate wave. It wasn't a greeting. It was a signal, one that sent a chill through Jonah's chest. Jonah drove away, heart pounding, his mind stuck on the image of that silent wave. He didn't know why he'd been chosen, or what the driver wanted. The sense of being hunted lingered long after the sedan disappeared from his mirrors. Every car behind him for weeks after felt like a threat. The questions never left. Why him? Why that night? What would have happened if he'd stopped for even a moment longer? He finished his shift, but nothing about driving felt routine after that. The memory of the sedan and its driver, the calculated pursuit, the waiting, the wave, stayed with him. It was less about what happened and more about what could have happened. The sense that someone out there was searching for a target and found him. Not every danger on the road announces itself with flashing lights or loud threats. Sometimes it's the quiet, relentless presence that unsettles you most. A reminder that, for every story of escape, there's someone on the other side, watching, waiting, and making their own plans. Understanding how these encounters unfold means looking through the eyes of those who orchestrate them. For the people behind these roadside ambushes, the road isn't just a stretch of asphalt. It's a hunting ground. Every move is planned, every detail considered, and the aim is always the same: to exploit the gap between safety and isolation. Take the trucker's ordeal on I-40. The spikes scattered across the lanes weren't left to chance. They were set with precision, meant to disable a vehicle and force the driver to stop in the worst possible place. The disabled pickup truck with its flickering hazards was no accident, but a lure designed to draw in anyone who still believed in the routine of helping strangers. The figures waiting in the ditch watched for hesitation, timing their approach to the second. The moment the trucker realized the trap, it was nearly too late. These tactics aren't improvised. They're the product of careful study, a calculated use of deception and timing. Deception is the predator's most reliable tool. The fake breakdown, the urgent hazard lights, the sense that someone needs help, all of it is meant to lower a driver's guard for just long enough. It's a test of instinct. Do you stop, or do you trust that uneasy feeling and keep moving? The predators count on that moment of doubt. If the driver hesitates, the trap springs shut. If not, the opportunity slips away, but only for now. The Kansas gas station encounter is another example. That run-down station with its flickering gas and go sign and empty lot created the perfect setting. The traveler's isolation was complete, and the figures who emerged from behind the building knew how to use the environment to their advantage. The attendant's warning cut through the moment, but the threat was already in motion. Not every tactic relies on physical traps. Sometimes the weapon is psychological. The Uber driver in Boise faced a different kind of predator. The dark sedan behind him didn't just follow. It manipulated every move. The driver would surge forward, then suddenly stop in the middle of the road without hazards, forcing Jonah to react, to question what was happening. The chase wasn't about catching him right away. It was about creating fear, uncertainty, and the sense that escape was impossible. When the sedan's driver finally appeared under a streetlight and offered a slow, deliberate wave, the message was unmistakable. I see you. I control this moment. The goal wasn't theft or violence, but domination, a kind of power that lingers long after the road is empty. The predators who haunt these stories thrive on control. They aren't looking for a quick score. They want to shape the narrative, to make their victims feel powerless and alone. The aftermath is as important as the act itself. When the trucker reported the I-40 ambush, police found nothing. No spikes, no pickup, not even footprints in the snow. The absence of evidence is part of the plan. It frustrates victims and law enforcement alike, allowing the predators to vanish as if they were never there. The stories get brushed aside as stress, fatigue, or imagination, but the fear remains real. Isolation is the setting, but psychological warfare is the method. The sedan's relentless pursuit, the figures waiting at the edge of the gas station lot, the calculated placement of hazards, all are designed to dismantle confidence and replace it with dread. These encounters leave victims questioning their own senses, wondering if what they saw was real or if their minds played tricks in the darkness. The ambiguity is intentional. The lack of motive, the absence of resolution, all serve to deepen the impact. The predator's satisfaction comes not from confrontation, but from the knowledge that they've left a mark that can't be erased. What drives someone to operate this way? It isn't just about material gain. The satisfaction comes from orchestrating fear, from knowing that even after the headlights fade, the memory will stick. The predator's confidence comes from the certainty that most people won't believe the stories, that the roads will always offer new opportunities. They count on routines, on the idea that no one expects danger until it's too late. Yet, in every account, there's a moment when instinct takes over, a split second where a driver swerves, flees, or listens to a warning. That gut feeling is often the only defense. The trucker's quick decision to swerve, the traveler's choice to obey the attendant, the Uber driver's push for a public space, all came down to intuition. These aren't just stories about danger. They're reminders that survival sometimes depends on trusting what you can't explain. If you ever feel that pit in your stomach, don't debate it. Turn away, drive on, survive. What remains after the headlights fade, after the figures retreat into the darkness, and the road grows quiet once again? For some, the aftermath of a close call on the road is a quiet, creeping dread that settles in and never really leaves. The lingering shadows aren't just memories, they're questions that refuse to resolve, doubts that keep surfacing every time the world goes quiet. The trucker on I-40 escaped the physical threat, but the real damage set in when the police found nothing. No tire spikes, no pickup, no footprints, just a blank report and the subtle suggestion that maybe it was all in his head. That emptiness became a kind of torment. He started to scan every stretch of highway for traps that might not be there, his eyes flicking to the shoulder where no headlights ever reach, convinced the figures could return at any moment. The routine of the road twisted into something tense and unfamiliar. Even years later, the silence of an empty highway felt loaded, as if the danger had only stepped aside, waiting for another chance. Kevin, the pizza delivery driver, found his fear didn't fade with daylight. The night he was stalked through the suburbs, forced off the road, and then confronted by a stranger's silent, knowing smile, marked a shift in his world. He couldn't explain what the stalker wanted, or why the pursuit ended the way it did. That lack of motive bred new anxieties. Every time a car followed too closely, every time he turned onto his street, he wondered if it was happening again. The smile in the dark became a recurring image, a flash in the mind that made him tense up at the smallest sign of trouble. The uncertainty was the cruelest part. Not knowing if he'd been chosen at random or targeted for a reason, not knowing if it could ever be explained. He started to question his own senses, unsure if the threat was real or if his memory had twisted it into something worse. The Kansas traveler's experience at the Gas N Go station brought the personal horror of these encounters into sharper focus. The attendant's urgent warning, the sudden emergence of shadowy figures, and the violent slam against his window left him shaken long after he sped away. When he later learned that others had reported similar incidents, always with no suspects and no resolution, it deepened his sense of unease. The gas station became a symbol of how quickly safety could vanish, how isolation on the road could turn familiar places into traps. He never did learn what the figures wanted, or if the attendant had truly been trying to help. That unanswered question haunted him, especially on long drives where his phone showed no signal and the only light came from failing neon signs. What links these stories is the psychological residue left behind. The mind tries to make sense of what it can't explain, replaying events, searching for missed clues or hidden meanings. The lack of closure keeps the fear alive, turning ordinary routines into moments of hypervigilance. For these drivers and travelers, the world becomes a series of threats to be anticipated and avoided. Mirrors get checked more often. Gas stations are chosen with care. Roads that once felt open and endless now feel like corridors where danger waits just out of sight. This isn't just about individual fear. It's a reflection of something deeper in how we view the spaces between towns, the places where help is far away and the rules feel suspended. Highways, deserted gas stations, and backroads are more than just settings for these stories. They're liminal spaces perched on the edge of safety and risk. The Kansas traveler's unease merges with a broader cultural anxiety that these empty stretches invite not just accidents, but deliberate harm. The highway shoulder where no headlights ever reach becomes the perfect hiding place for those who want to remain unseen. The sense that anything can happen in these places, because in those moments no one is watching, feeds the fear that lingers long after the journey ends. What makes these accounts so hard to shake is the lack of answers. There are no names, no mugshots, no neat explanations to file away. The predators remain shadows, their motives obscured, their actions unresolved. That unfinished business seeps into the lives of those who survive, leaving them with memories that can't be boxed up and put away. The fear becomes less about what happened and more about what could have happened, about how thin the line was between escape and disaster. Every time a driver glances at a darkened shoulder or an empty lot, the uncertainty returns. These stories serve as reminders that the world isn't always as safe as it seems. They warn us that the familiar can turn dangerous without warning, that the open road can close in fast. For the people who lived through these encounters, instinct, more than logic or procedure, made the difference. The trucker's decision to swerve, the traveler's obedience to a stranger's warning, the delivery driver's refusal to stop, all were split-second choices that kept them alive. Because when the night's silence turns to menace, your gut is your only ally. Every account you've heard tonight, whether it's the spikes on I-40 or the hooded figures at Gas and Go, serves as more than just a warning. They're reminders that danger often hides in the most ordinary places, waiting for a moment's hesitation. These stories aren't just about survival. They're about the choices that keep us one step ahead when the world turns unfamiliar. Reflect on what you've seen. Share this video with anyone who drives late at night, and tell us your own close call in the comments. If you survived these tales, hit subscribe and stay sharp. You never know where the next horror waits. Because in the dark stretches, the empty can lure you into a trap of its own making.